Students, happy and good morning to you all. Thank God for the new day. With all warmth and affection, I greet and welcome each one of you to the class on commercial applications. Please stay focused. We are into the chapter Communication in a Commercial Organization. Communication in a commercial organization. The learning objectives for today's class are as follows, children. We are going to take up the barriers to communication, the main barriers to communication in commercial organizations. The main barriers to communication in commercial organizations, there are about 8, namely physical barriers, we got personal barriers, we got semantic or language barriers, we have status barriers, organizational barriers, inadequate attention as a barrier to communication, we have perception and premature evaluation, we have resistance to change as a barrier to communication. Soon after covering the barriers to communication, we will take up main principles to effective communication. The main principles to effective communication, there are about 12 children, namely clarity, principle of completeness, correctness, consistency, objectivity, consultation, attentiveness, appropriateness, proper organization structure, mutual trust and confidence, timeliness, and feedback. There are 12 principles to effective communication, children. Now we move on to understand barriers to communication. The main barriers to communication in commercial organizations are 8. The first one is physical barrier. Before I take up the physical barrier, let me tell you what are communication barriers. As the name itself suggests, communication barriers are those barriers, obstacles, stumbling blocks, hindrances, limitations, difficulties, hurdles to communication. So, these are nothing but hindrances or obstacles or hurdles created to communication. Communication barriers are something that prevents us from correctly getting and accepting messages, information, thoughts, ideas, etc. Communication barriers can include, children, anything that prevents or disables us to deliver the right message to the right person at the right time. So communication barriers can have an impact on people's life, personal life, professional life. People around the world have been facing social distancing restrictions nowadays due to pandemic. Yes, definitely. This is a huge barrier to communication. People are limited to communicate using digital tools and technologies, etc. Employers in the organization across the world are forced to adjust to the new way of working, new way of functioning, new way of running the business, and they need to be better accommodate the workers. All that through communication is not made possible or easy because of several hurdles. So hurdles or obstacles or hindrances, also called as communication barriers. First, let us take up physical barrier. As the name itself suggests, physical barriers are nothing but structural obstacles in natural or man-made environment that prevents or blocks access. Let us see what does it mean. Physical distance between the sender and the receiver of the message is an important barrier to communication. Noise, environmental factors, mechanical barriers, etc. cause barriers to communication. So what does it mean? Physical distance. Physical distance is nothing but geographical distance between the sender and the receiver. Physical barriers are nothing but structural obstacles in natural or man-made environments that prevent or block access to proper communication. This is due to the nature of environment. Natural barriers, also called as physical barriers, exist. For example, if the staff is located at different buildings at different sites. For example, time, space, place, climate, noise, all this come under physical barriers. Some are alterable, but some can prove to be tough obstacles to communication process. Geographic distance, for example, between the sender and the receiver is also a barrier. Social distancing, remote working, deskless nature of work, closed door office, and closed office doors, etc. are all physical barriers. Physical barriers create physical separation between the sender and the receiver. What happens then? This continues to be an obstacle for effective communication. So physical distance between the sender and the receiver of the message is important for proper communication, and this is not made possible for various reasons. I told you now, even noise, environment creates a different environment, atmosphere, environmental factors like pandemic, all this creating social distancing, all kind of rules and regulations where people isolate, people go into quarantine. All this creates barriers to communication, mechanical barriers, etc. All physical barriers to communication. Next is personal barrier. The name itself suggests difference in levels of understanding of different people. Difference in the level of understanding, differences in judgment of the people, differences in the values, pressure of time, inability to communicate, inferiority complex or inferior complex, etc. of the sender and the receiver obstruct communication. First of all, let me tell you what is inferiority complex. Inferiority complex is nothing but children feeling down on oneself, wanting to give up easily. It is a psychological term used to describe the personal kind of intense feeling of inadequacy, intense feeling of insecurity, fear, low self-esteem. All that helps in creating personal barriers to effective communication. First of all, children, you must understand personal barriers relate to factors that are personal between the sender and the receiver and act as a hindrance to proper communication process. These include, for example, life experiences, emotions, attitudes, behavior of the person that blocks the ability of a person to communicate. For example, again I'll tell you, even fear, pride, not taking responsibility, lack of self-discipline, lack of motivation, etc. are all important personal barriers. The most common personal barriers are lack of listening skill, lack of knowledge, lack of vocabulary, selective attention. All this come under personal barriers, which hinders communication, which hinders transmission of information. Overcoming these barriers can help persons achieve personal development, career success, interpersonal relationship, etc. For example, among students also, I tell you children, some feel as if they are not good as others, and it can provoke anxiety in many situations. They will not be doing very well. So this creates personal barriers. Next one is semantic, also called as language barriers. Semantics is a science of meaning in language or logic. What is semantics? Semantics is the science of meaning in language or logic. The same words and symbols may carry different meanings to different people. The language used by sender may not be understood by the receiver. Communication breaks down when the sender and the receiver use language, words, symbols in different senses, different understanding. Semantics relates to the meaning in language or logic. For example, one word can have different meanings in different contexts, different situation. But in semantics, analysis becomes different. Semantic barriers to communication are important. These are technical barriers which are symbolic obstacles that distort or disturb messages sent in some other way than intended, making the message difficult to understand. I mean word. So when you speak a word, we should understand, the receiver should understand the same way. It is important. The audience should mean what the speaker means. The communicator should use words which the communicator receives well and understands well. Meaning of words, signs. You must understand, children. Signs, symbols might be different from one person to another. You must understand. Between the sender and the receiver, it may mean different things. A same word might have many meanings. Semantic barriers refers to misunderstanding, misinterpretation of meaning, which hinders, restricts good communication. Even in meanings, we have got this conceptual meaning, we got associative meaning, different ways. The receiver should know what the sender means by using such words, using such symbols, using such languages. So the vocabulary is also very, very important to understand the message completely by the receiver. So what the sender means, the receiver to understand must be possible, made possible. That is semantic or language barriers. Next we move on to status barriers. Status is nothing but the position of a person in an organization. What is status? Status is nothing but position of a person in an organization. So status barrier. Please understand this, children. Status. We call it as status. Commonly we use the word status. That's the way we say it. But status. Status barriers, position of a person in an organization. Status barriers is a major barrier in the free flow of information. Superiors pass on only selected information to their subordinates in order to maintain status differences. Subordinates, that's workers, convey only the information that which the superior appreciates. They hide many things. They become selective in passing on information. That creates distortion, disturbances in the communication process. Status can cause distortion in both downward and upward communication. Downward communication is nothing but communication, the message passed on from the superior towards the subordinates, workers. Whereas upward communication is the opposite of downward communication, where the subordinates, the workers at the lower level, communicate with the superiors at the higher level. Please make a note here, children, that status, people have different status, differences in status when trying to inform or persuade others. Like social status in a society is an indicator of credibility and legitimacy. And this affects how seriously the others take what one says. The status of the people also matters when you communicate. Status difference create a bias or prejudice against those with the perceived lower status. The people at the higher status may not communicate well with the people at the lower status. So status barriers are very, very common, not only in society but also in the organizations, companies, because status is nothing but the position of a person in an organization. Please make a note, children. Please make a note here. Status in organization is fundamental barrier that obstructs the flow of information between the superior and the subordinates. So what happens now? So superiors only give little information to subordinates because of status, and subordinates may not convey proper information, complete information to the superiors because of status issue. Status causes distortion, disturbances in downward and upward kind of communication. Definitely. So, status in organization is fundamental barrier that obstructs the flow of information in workplace, that prevents exchange of thoughts and ideas. Due to status? Yes. Next we move on to understand organizational barriers. So, what is organizational barrier? By the name itself you can understand. Organizational barriers refers to the hindrances in the flow of information between the employer and the employee that results in total failure of the organization. So what is organizational structure? Complex organizational structure of a firm causes greater chances of distortion or breakdown in communication, which tends to be slow and rigid. What is organizational structure, children? Please make a note here. Organizational structure is nothing but a system of how activities are directed. These include roles of a person. You have different positions. Manager, managing trustee, managing director, responsibilities, roles and responsibilities. This organizational structure also refers to the flow of information between various levels of positions within the company, within the organization. If the organizational structure is very rigid, flow of information becomes a problem. Barriers created, hindrances are created, obstacles are created. So the organizational structure first of all should be flexible, simple and easy to understand first of all. The roles played by different people should be easy to be understood by the subordinates at a higher level. So you must understand that complex organization, complex means what? Rigid, very formal and complex organizational structure of a firm cause greater chances of distortion, disturbances and breakdown in communication, which tends to be slow and rigid. So you must understand, organizational barriers refers to the hindrances in the flow of information between the employers and the employees at the higher level and the lower level. If that happens, it will result in a commercial failure of an organization. Rigid organizational structure will create lack of planning, wrong assumptions, emotions, semantic problems. So, rigid organizational structure means complex organizational structure will hinder effective communication between the members of the organization. These barriers pertain to the problems with structures or systems like performance, feedback, training, delegation, direction, ordering, etc. All that happens. All these are nothing but the various tools of communication. So organizational structure hinders, if it's rigid, it will hinder the free flow of information. So what is organizational structure again? I'm telling you children. It is nothing but a system. Structure is nothing but a system of how activities are directed. This may include the rules, regulation, the roles played by each people and the responsibilities which each of the members of the organization have. And it also means to the free flow of information between the levels, various levels within the organization. Next is inadequate attention and lack of trust as a barrier of communication. Inadequate attention. Please make a note, children. I put two important factors together. Inadequate attention will take first, and we'll move on to understand lack of trust. Inadequate attention to messages, to information. Even now, as I am talking to you, you must pay total attention, undivided attention. If you pay inadequate attention, not enough attention, insufficient attention, poor attention, you will not understand what I am trying to tell. It will lead you to misunderstanding. Inattention leads to misunderstanding of the message. Inattention may arise when the communicatee, here in this case, I am communicating to you, I am a communicator, and you all listeners, learners, you become communicatees. arise when the communicator is very busy or the message is contrary to his expectation and beliefs. This can happen. So if you're going to oppose the message sent by the sender, you may not understand properly, you may not pay attention to it because you don't value such information, because you have already a fixed idea, a contrary idea, opposing idea about the message sent by the sender to the receiver. So what happens here, children? Inattention, inadequate attention or poor attention, not enough attention to the message makes communication less effective and makes the message likely to be distorted, likely to be misunderstood. So inattention, please make a note here, children. Inattention is because of the message being contrary to the sender's, contrary to the receiver's expectation and beliefs. So you must understand this. So inadequate attention of the message makes the communication less effective and the message is likely to be misunderstood, no doubt about it. Next we move on to lack of trust. I'll tell you, children, first of all, to start, relationship can be lost without proper trust. So trust is very important. Trust in organization, please understand, children. Trust in organization involves communication. Let me read out. Communication becomes ineffective where there is lack of faith, lack of trust between the sender and the receiver. Emotional attitudes on part of the sender and the receiver also obstruct the free flow of information. Definitely. So what happens here? Trust in organization involves communication. Trust builds loyalty and credibility. Please note this, children. Trust involves commitment, collaboration, competence. If there is no trust, where is commitment? If there is no trust, where is collaboration? So you must understand, when there is no trust, no one will voice out their opinion, ideas, and there will be little or no teamwork, no team spirit, no team cohesion. Lack of trust reduces transparency. Lack of trust makes the workers often avoid communicating with each other. So inadequate attention leads to misunderstanding of poor understanding about the message, and lack of trust leads to lack of communication. So emotional attitudes on the part of the sender and the receiver is very, very important. So trust, faith, belief is very important in communication, in proper and effective communication. Next we move on to the next important barrier is perception and premature evaluation. Here also I put two important factors together so that we can understand it correctly. Yes, the next important factor is perception and premature evaluation. Students, you must understand, perception is nothing but the ability to see, ability to hear, ability to think and become aware of something through our senses. Perception, ability to think, have our own viewpoints, have our own opinions, concepts, approaches. And premature evaluation is nothing but you're going to evaluate the message before the sender is completing it. Before the sentence is completed, you try to understand it, you don't understand it completely and properly. Premature is nothing but hasty work, a hurried work, hurried understanding. Hasty understanding is not understanding. Hasty understanding will lead you to misunderstanding. So, perception, the way you think, the way you see, the way you hear, become aware of something through senses, and how you approach, how you take it, what is your viewpoint about the concepts. All these are perceptions and premature evaluation. Now, how we consider this as a barrier? Let us see. Perception means interpreting the message according to one's interests and motives. It leads to faulty interpretation of the message. Judgment formed at the conclusion before receiving the complete message. Before receiving what sort of message? Complete message. This distorts understanding and acts as a barrier to communication. Definitely. So, perception is nothing but how you see, the ability to see, hear and think and be aware of something through our senses. So, perception, please make a note here, children. Perception means interpreting the message according to one's interests and motives. It leads to misunderstanding. So barriers to effective communication is created. If you have a wrong approach, wrong viewpoint, wrong concept, inability to understand, inability to hear properly, the way you think is wrong, you may not understand the message correctly. Your perception is very important. How you think, you must have a deeper thinking, right thinking. Premature evaluation. Premature evaluation is a hindrance in exchange of information and a tendency to form judgment before listening to the entire message. So, you must understand, children, this distorts the understanding, acts as a barrier to communication. Definitely. Because the enthusiasm of the sender gets damaged or dampened because you're not able to, suppose a teacher is teaching in the class. Before the teacher conclude the view, conclude the explanation. Some children try to understand it, try to no, you can't. So you must wait for the teacher to complete the explanation, complete a sentence or his sentences, and then you can raise questions to understand it. So you must be very careful. Tendency to form a judgment before listening to the entire message is also very wrong. Judgment is nothing but coming to a conclusion and passing a kind of a verdict. It's very, very important. Even in court of law, judges have to listen to the complete story of the cases. Then only they can pass a conclusion and pass a judgment. Next is resistant to change. Last but not the least, barrier to communication is resistant to change. What is resistance to change? Resistance means it's an action taken by individuals or groups when they perceive that change is a threat, a change. That means they're going to oppose the change. They're going to become contrary, rebellious towards the change. Every organization needs change. Every institution needs changes to be seen. That can happen through proper communication. Let us see how resistant to change is a barrier to communication. When new ideas are communicated to introduce a change, people may overlook or oppose the message. People stick to their existing way of life and resist change. That is happening. So change comes through proper communication. If there is no proper communication, if there are barriers to communication, how can you understand change? Change is a very important aspect in every organization. The company has to grow from small to big. All that happens through proper communication systems, the communication process. When new ideas are communicated to introduce a change, people may overlook or oppose the message. They create an hindrance. It is the opposition to the altered circumstances of the status quo. Status quo is nothing but, it's a Latin phrase, children. You got that in the text. Status quo is nothing but a Latin phrase, which means state of affairs existing already. People are used to the existing situation. People are not happy to welcome the new coming, new change or the new situation. People stick to their existing way of life. Workers resist change when they have not knowing the reason for change. Please make a note of this, children. Workers resist change in the organization when they have not knowing the reason for change or the thinking behind the decision making. So, all this are taken as important barriers to communication. What are the important barriers to communication, children? Let me recall and tell you for you. The main barriers to communication are, we have seen the physical barriers, we have seen the personal barriers, semantic or language barriers, status barriers, we have seen organizational barrier, we have seen inadequate attention as a barrier, perception, the approach, the thinking, the belief you have about the communication process, and the premature evaluation, resistant to change. All these are barriers to communication. With this, children, owing to the time slot, I'm going to end the session. Until I see you until I meet you, I wish and I pray God bless you. Thank you.